So I started formulating it using lucidol, and I think I experimented with a few other preservatives. But then I enrolled in a skincare class where I was told that the best broad spectrum preservative is Geogard. So I switched over to Geogard. But then I found that I had some difficulty when I was trying to formulate it, trying to get it to dissolve in the product. So I wanted to make this video just in case someone else is experiencing the same thing. So I tried numerous things, and this is what I found worked to get the product to dissolve in water completely. I would add the Geogard to the water like I'm doing here, but I would start mixing the water before I started adding the Geogard. And then you also want to make sure you add it bit by bit, taking breaks in between. So you want to add just a little bit, make sure you're mixing that, wait a little bit, let that dissolve, and then you want to add some more. So you want to add bit by bit, taking breaks in between, and you want to make sure you continue to mix the water while you're pouring the Geogard in. Geogard likes activity. It doesn't like boring. It doesn't like anything stagnant. It wants to come in with stuff moving. Geogard likes excitement. And so I found that that was the best thing for me to do to make sure that I got the product to dissolve completely in water before I added it to my product. Because what happens if it doesn't dissolve completely, it forms crystals, and then you get those crystals in the product. And instead of those things absorbing into the skin, they actually sit on the surface of the skin and they create irritation. So it's important to understand how to get that Geogard to dissolve into your product. I've done it with hot water. Right here I'm doing it with room temperature water, and as you can see, I'll get it to dissolve completely in this water using this technique. You have to make certain that you are giving that water some activity before you start pouring that Geogard in, and then you need to continue mixing. If it's a good bit, you can use a handheld blender, an immersion blender, just to make sure you're getting that in there and that you're able to move all the product around the liquid. So, but because it's a small amount and I'm just doing this for the purpose of sharing this video and this knowledge with you, I'm using a small amount of Geogard and a small amount of water. Now, this is the second sample that I used. I had just poured the Geogard in here. I didn't do it slowly. I took a little more time. And as you can see, it's harder to get the product to dissolve. This one still has a lot of, the Geogard becomes beads in the water, and they're still sitting at the bottom of the container. Now, eventually they're going to dissolve, but it's going to take a longer time because I poured so much in at one time. Even though I was pouring it in increments, the amount that I was pouring in increments was still too much. So now I'm going to show you the third method, which is the one you absolutely do not want to do, which is I'm going to pour some water into this container. And as soon as I'm done doing whatever I was doing there with the other samples, I'm going to get some Geogard, and then I'm going to pour some water into this container here. Measure out some Geogard. Doesn't have to be a lot because I'm not making a product here. I'm just doing this for this example. So, and I just pour all of it in one time. This is what you do not want to do. This is when you're going to get a bad result. It's not going to dissolve in the water properly. So now I'm just going to try and mix it around a little bit, create some activity. Mixing. And as soon as I move my hand, you'll see that with all that mixing, providing all that activity, the ingredients still didn't dissolve properly in the water. You're going to see that it's still cloudy. So I continue to mix some more, hoping that, the activity creating some heat and some movement would help the Geogard to dissolve, but it doesn't work. Once that Geogard hits the water and there's no movement, because I think the water helps to break the particle down, the movement of the water and mixing around creating some heat, I think that helps to break the particle down. And when the Geogard hits the water without the movement, without any heat, it actually starts to crystallize, and you can see it right here. And I've even tried to leave this when I did it this technique. I left it overnight one night, and the next morning when I looked at it, it was actually worse. I could barely see any trace of water. It seemed like the Geogard had swollen and crystallized, and I could barely see any signs of water. And so this method does not work at all. Not at all. Just pouring all of the Geogard into the water and mixing it like that, it does not work at all. So as you can see, it's still, I'm letting it sit there just so we can see, you can still see the particles moving around at the bottom. You can still see even some of them settling at the top of the water to show absolutely none. Whereas this is the first, let's compare it to the first sample. The first one where I poured it in small increments, slowly, small increments, slowly taking breaks while mixing. That one has dissolved completely. There is no, you can see no trace of the product. It is dissolved completely in the water. But this one, I'm still working with it, still keeping hope alive, still having a little bit of faith here, putting some work with my faith. But look, this is just not going to work. So you want to make certain you are pouring Geogard into water that's already movement. You want to start stirring before you pour your Geogard into the water. And you want to stir it in small increments, taking breaks, and continue to stir until you have poured all of your Geogard into the water. Otherwise, you can use an immersion blender, but you have to pour it in slowly. It reminds me of how you work with hyaluronic acid. Just bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit until it's all dissolved. Because otherwise, you don't want that sitting on the client's face in a product because you didn't dissolve it completely. And that's it.